Hello, folks. This is Dan Lizette from the Podcast Digest. Welcome back to episode 78. Thank you guys for tuning back in. As you probably know by now from looking at the episode title, I've got another great guest, Mr. Andy Ihnatko, joined me this week, and it was a phenomenal conversation, a real thrill for me to be able to talk to Andy. But before we get to that conversation, I just wanted to take a minute or two and thank you for taking the time to listen, for sharing this little show of mine. I hope you guys have really been enjoying a lot of the recent episodes, especially since the turn of the year. It really has been a heck of a ride here at the Podcast Digest, and I have been having so much fun talking to the likes of Russell Ivanovich, John Siracusa, Roman Mars, Brett and Nick from Where There's Smoke, Allison from The Intern, and so on and so on. It has been a lot of fun, and I hope you've been enjoying it too. I know a lot of you are recent followers and subscribers to the show, and I don't usually do this during the course of my interview, so I want to take just a quick minute and say that if you have been enjoying recent weeks or any of the shows in the back catalog of the Podcast Digest, or if you enjoy this upcoming conversation with Mr. Andy Ihnatko, please, if you would, take just a quick moment and leave an iTunes review. If you have access to iTunes, if you're willing to take just a moment, I'd really greatly appreciate it. It does wonders to help the show get discovered, to have people come and find it, to have other listeners jump on board and listen to some of these great conversations. I mean, it's been a thrill to me to have these conversations, and the only thing I really ask in for return is to share it, to have everyone get a little bit of the enjoyment that I've had from this. So if you would, take a quick moment, leave me a review. It really, really does go a long way. So with that said, folks, I don't want to delay anymore. Let's get right to my conversation with Andy Ihnatko. Folks, welcome back to the Podcast Digest. On this week's show, as I mentioned in the brief little intro there, my guest this week, you might know him from the Chicago Sun-Times, from MacBreak Weekly, maybe from Ihnatko's Almanac, from his appearances on the Incomparable, or possibly as co-host of Material Podcast. I know him quite simply as one of my favorite voices in all of technology. It's now my true privilege to welcome to the show Andy Ihnatko. Andy, welcome to the Podcast Digest.
Thanks a lot, Dan.
Well, you heard my conversation with Russell a few weeks back, and which was ironic because you don't think when you're saying those things, at least from my seat, that the other person would actually hear it. So it was a true thrill to hear that you took a listen to my conversation with Russell and that you were willing to come and talk to me. So I really appreciate it.
Well, I was listening with my lawyers. It's good. It's just good to have a witness, just in case. But no, it was very, very pleasant. I was advised, but I declined that advice, and so we will not be moving forward with any litigation, which is the greatest compliment I can give to any podcaster who's ever spoken about me in a podcast.
Is that you will not utilize litigation?
Yeah, I mean there'll be retribution of another kind, but you know.
Well, folks, if you're not familiar with Andy's work, I would like to get to know Andy just a little bit more. And I imagine a lot of people who are hopping over to listen to this episode do know a lot of your current work. So I want to talk a little bit about maybe some things people aren't familiar with, which is maybe the Andy before the writer, way back, little Andy. Can you tell folks a little bit about kind of where you're from and maybe growing up, what you thought you'd be doing and what you're doing now?
Well, the strange thing is that I always thought I'd be doing something like this. I just didn't know that this would actually be a job. I'm one of those kids that just I always enjoyed writing, but from junior high school onward, I had the writing bug bite me pretty hard when I started reading Douglas Adams books, and for some reason that was the one that got me to. Well, I bet I could. I want to write my own story that's kind of like that. And I'd been writing about almost every day ever since then. And being a nerd, of course, I had computers, and we had an Apple IIe in the house. And I'd spend most of my time after school writing apps for it, then going from BASIC to Pascal to machine language, all the way to creating my own version of the Apple DOS operating system that found its way without the school's knowledge onto all of the master floppies of the computer lab at school, but it was an improvement on Apple DOS, so they really didn't have any reason to complain. So no, it was just really, I would really loved, whether I was writing words or writing code, just creating stuff on this Apple. And you don't know what you're going to be doing for the rest of your life when you're in junior high or high school, but you at least know what half of the planet you're going to head off to. I figured that I'd be writing software for a living and writing on the side. I was just very pleased that it turned out that I'm able to write about technology and combine two of the things that really moved me.
Any interesting jobs when you were in that kind of late teenager, early 20? Anything looking back, you said, well, I did that for 6 months and it was pretty crazy?
Not particularly crazy. There was one summer that I was loading 50-pound bags of peat moss on the back of trucks during a summer, and that has always been my definition of anytime I think that, oh gosh, sitting at this desk inside this heated house and typing is just too much work for me, I just think about all that time where it's like it's 93 degrees and another order has come in and they're backing up the truck and you have to load a truck full of peat moss. Not a lot of fun. It was a lot more interesting when I was the weekend janitor for my local post office when I was a teenager. It wasn't as sophisticated as I make it sound, of course, nor as delightful or glamorous. It was just, it just needed to be cleaned like once a week. So I'd come in Saturday morning and spend 2 or 3 hours emptying wastebaskets and cleaning the floors and making sure everything was cleaning the windows and stuff like that, which was cool chiefly because, of course, it was a post office and it had like all those post office boxes. So people would throw out like industry magazines that they were getting that they didn't want, like these free subscriptions. So back in the day, like back in the 80s, of course, there's no internet. And so technology magazines, like for electronic engineers, would be these free magazines you get every single week because you're a member of you're a professional and you're someone they want to target ads to. But really, these great like weekly news magazines on big broadsheet print, and so it'd be thrown away. So I would pluck these things out of the trash and get to read about mostly about components and wafer design and this sort of stuff. So it was a way to sort of broaden my experience without having to falsify a PhD in engineering in order to qualify for one of these subscriptions.
If you could tell folks a little bit about kind of how the professional writing started. So people know you now from the Chicago Sun-Times. Were there other entities that you had written for a little while before then?
Yeah, I was a columnist for Macworld for a number of years. I started off at Mac User, for instance, I think when I was 19 or 20, and I've been writing I had a column there for, gosh, must have been 10 years, and then they and Macworld unified, and then I started writing for them, and so I was their Backpage columnist for just years and years and years. There was a little bit of a break when, of course, they had two Backpage columnists, and Macworld's Backpage columnist was David Pogue, and so Pogue got more votes than Ihnatko between the merged editorial board, and so I was off the Backpage for a few years, and then he went on to the New York Times, so I got the Backpage back. But that's pretty much been, and I've been doing for commercial websites. In the Mac community, I've been doing stuff for mainstream websites and a couple of different magazines. Had a couple things done I'm sorry. No, I'm sorry. I need to correct myself before I even say something. So yeah, but mostly that kind of stuff. I got my start actually writing for my local Boston Boston Computer Society Macintosh User Group magazine, and doing like the monthly meeting report, and then just it's a really great situation when you have this. They're so desperate for people to do work for free that they don't care what work you do so long as you do it. So it was a really great playground to just write whatever I wanted and then just sort of figure out how to write columns and express my point of view in ideally 700, 800 words.
I've always enjoyed your writing. I think that it is very much like the podcasting, which we're moving our conversation towards, but you've got a really unique voice when you're writing, coming from a particular perspective. Do you feel like that's sort of evolved over time or changed, or do you feel like you've kind of always had a particular perspective that people and readers were kind of attracted to from the get-go?
There was nothing deliberate about that. It was just I suppose I owe it to the fact that I was given complete free reign at the Boston Computer Society for when I was learning how to do this job. And so when I started writing for Mac User, you start to figure out that I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing and see how long I can get away with it. And they never said anything about it. So I never really learned sort of that formal news style of writing where it's your job to get as many facts as possible and then to relate them as clearly and quickly and efficiently as you can. It's always been, what do I think about this? Make sure that I've got the facts, make sure that I've got an informed opinion, make sure that I've got an opinion that I can defend and one that's aware of all these alternative opinions. But then once you've just made a decision on what you think, definitely make that point. I mean, without your point of view, you're really not giving anything valuable or unique. That's actually something that really occurred to me very early on, that there are a great many people who can write a review of a certain piece of software or write a take on a certain piece of news. If I wanted to survive in this line of work, I needed to make sure that I was the only one who could provide an Andy Ihnatko take or an Andy Ihnatko point of view. And the bonus being that if I made it entertaining and interesting to read, then people would read whatever I wrote, no matter what the topic. And that might sound arrogant, but what I meant was that oftentimes I would skim the first couple of paragraphs of an article in a magazine or something. And if I wasn't particularly interested in the topic, if it was, well, I'm not really into cars, so what do I care about the new taillight design on this new Pontiac? But if it's a writer who makes everything interesting, then I'm going to read it just because this author always gives me something interesting to read. And then along the way, I will start to learn that here's what's important about taillights, and here's why these super bright LEDs are going to totally change the design of cars. Something that I would never have learned about, but I found very, very interesting. And I sort of got tricked. I got bamboozled into reading it simply because I enjoy what this person writes. And so I kind of wanted to be that kind of a guy for technology. I was a big fan of Dave Barry. I was a big fan of Andy Rooney, who mostly people know as the nonagenarian commentator, grumpy guy on 60 Minutes. But he was a newspaper columnist for decades and decades and decades. He would have an anthology of his essays printed about every year. And more important than that, of course, Roger Ebert, who kind of gave me my love of movies, because every single thing he wrote about every single movie was always interesting. So even if it was a movie I had absolutely no interest in whatsoever, I would definitely be interested in what Roger Ebert had to say about it. And as a result, I would learn about all these, these hotsy-totsy, highfalutin French movies that I maybe would never have given a second glance to at the video store, but because I was tricked into reading it by a really great writer, Roger Ebert, I've kind of got interested in like an Ozu movie, the Ozu's Japanese movies, and all these other classics that, again, a kid who's looking forward only to the next Lucasfilm release would probably not have paid attention to. But that's really where I got those lessons from.
You mentioned Roger Ebert, and I had a note that I wanted to bring him up, but I just wanted to mention this as kind of a unique opportunity that I get as a listener of yours that so many other listeners probably don't have the opportunity to have this type of conversation with you. I just wanted to say that after Roger's passing, your commentary through the podcast was so vivid and brought the story of his work to light in a way that completely intrigued me to go out and find his work and find those old shows on YouTube and learn more and more things that I wasn't familiar with. And that was because of the way you spoke and the way you talked about his time knowing him. And so I just wanted to mention that to you because it was very impactful on me, a listener who wasn't wildly familiar with the work that he did.
Well, I'm very glad to hear that because he was a terrific friend. I loved him dearly, and I still miss him to this day. And I felt as though I really needed to eulogize him, even though he's one of the most famous people in the entire world. And there was no shortage of people who probably knew him even better than I did, and people who didn't know him at all, who were writing these wonderful and insightful things about him through his work. And it's just so hard to figure out exactly how you convey that. And I was also intimidated by the idea of I wouldn't say this about people who are writing about Roger, but sometimes you will see like Johnny Carson dies, and someone will write an essay about Johnny Carson, which is mostly less about what an interesting and talented guy Johnny Carson was, but more of, I want to talk about the time where I made Johnny Carson laugh.
Right.
And that way you'll all know that I'm funny enough that one time the funniest guy in the world laughed at one of my jokes. And it's like, how do you write about your experiences with an exceptional person in such a way that it can't even possibly make sure the spotlight is 100% of this other person. And I mean, the strangest thing was, the other problem is that we were really good friends, and there are a lot of moments where it really does illustrate who this guy was and why he was so fantastic, and why people like me, even 3 years after his death, are still talking about what a terrific person, what a terrific example he set. But nonetheless thinking, okay, but he didn't say anything that was really personal or scandalous during this conversation, but did he say this with any sort of understanding that maybe when I'm, he had a couple of decades on me at least. And, unless something really unfortunate happened, he knew that I was going to outlive him. But did he think that, well, maybe when we're taking this walk, at some point he will tell the story about what I said and how he reacted to certain things. And there's also the thing of, well, right now this is just a private moment between myself and Roger, and if I were to write about it, it becomes everybody else's too. And so, like I said, it was just very, very intimidating. So if all I can do is just say that, again, I loved him. He was just a wonderful example, not just as a journalist, but also as a friend and a human being. I hope that makes the correct impression. I feel sorry for anybody who didn't have an opportunity to meet him.
Yeah, it was. I just wanted to mention that as well, and so from one listener, as I mentioned. Before I get into the podcast, I want one more question for you about the writing. Primarily, by and large, with some exceptions, I know you have written about technology, obviously, probably your prime passion, if you will. But I do know you've kind of gone in a couple other directions a few times. Have you been scratching that itch? Has that itch been building to kind of go into other areas, kind of outside of technology? Or do you anticipate kind of staying in the technological lane for a while?
It's nice to be doing something that I'm very confident about, because at that point it stops. There's a certain point in which you've learned how to walk, and you don't have to keep concentrating on your balance or how you're moving your legs and what your muscles are doing, and you can just walk. And when you've written enough, or you've written enough code, or you've drawn enough pictures, you know how those muscles work, and I know how my voice works. And so it really just comes down to all the effort can be into what I'm actually saying. And I don't have to second guess myself as to thinking about, will what I say be valuable of any kind? That's not a way of my saying that everything I say is valuable, but I have a good sense of when I'm about to waste people's time with just thoughts that aren't terribly useful to anybody but myself. So that's always fun, and I'll always want to do that. Nonetheless, I think that if you're not also doing things that you don't feel like you're good at, that you don't feel like you're comfortable in, where you do have to sort of command your bones and your muscles to move and think about where every single step goes, you're not really growing, and you're not really maintaining that level of excitement you should have in your daily life. So I do write about a lot of stuff that has little to do with technology. That's the stuff that I will send to like Boing Boing or other friends' blogs, or put on my own blog, like social issues and just things like photography and other stuff like that. And I certainly do enjoy that. I really have a lot of fun working on fiction. I don't feel as though my work is at the point where I'd like to show it to anybody yet. Because really, there's nothing. I've read like works of fiction written by people that have spent 20 years writing about technology or writing technical stuff, or people who are not, or actors who are writing their first novel, who clearly have not been writing novels in secret all their life. And it's like, this shows a lot of excitement and a lot of passion. I'm so happy for you that you finished this. And I'm not being sarcastic, but it's clearly somebody's first novel that when I finished my first novel, I let it sit for a month. I read it back, and I thought, okay, I'm very pleased I did this. This is a real accomplishment. But now this is just the first novel that let me learn things so I could write the second novel, and on and on and on until we get to a point where I feel as though now I might be close to a point where I can actually show something to somebody. But isn't it wonderful to just have that sort of thing where you're, in a helpful, constructive way, second-guessing everything you do and trying to think about, well, how can I make this better, or why does this part seem weak? The story that I'm writing right now is that sort of thing where when I first outlined it, another novel ago, it was a great idea, but the outline that I had was, okay, well, this character, there's just nothing particularly interesting about them, or there's no reason for us to root for this character or be invested in what they're doing. And now I'm certainly not even competent, but at least I know that, okay, well, here's how I avoid that. And it's, like I said, it's a lot of fun. I'm also taking art lessons for the first time in like 20 years. And I did my first live drawing since college a couple of weeks ago, and I really stank at it. It was terrible. There was nothing there was maybe one drawing out of maybe 20 that, even in the context of, here is a photo of my iPad Pro in the studio lying on a chair with something I've drawn on it, not even as, hey, look at this great thing I've drawn, that I would even think about letting the world see. But at the end of it, I had the exact same flush of excitement that I had the first time when I was 10 or 11 that I finished a whopping 4-page short story. I still have it, and it's terrible, but it's that you're on the right track in terms of an activity or a hobby or a vocation that unleashes good, happy chemicals in your brain when you look at what you spent the afternoon doing and you say, this is not good, but I can't wait to try that again. It's when you say, this is not good, I suck, I'm terrible, I never want to even look at this ever again. That's the self-destructive sort of stuff. But when you see that, boy, I just enjoyed the fact that this exists, that it didn't exist before, and yes, I see all the faults in it, but that's going to help me to do better the next time. And that's where the real excitement goes. You don't have to make money off of everything you do. You don't even have to show off everything that you do. But anything that gets you excited about doing the next thing is a wholeheartedly positive thing.
You talk about your fiction writing, and I've been following that story for years as well, because I've heard you bring it up on any number of occasions on your namesake podcast on 5x5, the Ihnatko Almanac. Let's start there with talking about your library of podcasts. Can you tell folks a little bit how this show got started? It seemed like, and I could be misremembering these years ago, but you and Marco and John sort of all got in with the co-hosting with Dan, and everybody's show got off the ground in somewhere near time and in sort of similar formats, but you kind of took yours as almost what I consider to be like your own stage for commentary. That's certainly true, and part of it is that okay, I'm kind of a blabbermouth, and I kind of like to talk, and part of it though is that it's kind of, I just didn't have that sort of group of people that I could definitely set up for a regular recording session each and every week. If I were to change the show a little bit, it would be to have like more guests on where we can have more of an active conversation. But I do like these things where I can get some things off my chest and sort of follow a thought through to the very, very end. One of the other shows I do is MacBreak, and it's a panel of four. I'm one of a panel of 4 people, and there are times where I really want to say something, but someone else starts talking, and then I'm waiting for them to wrap up so I can say something. Then another person starts talking, and then, okay, maybe I'll get my turn, and then Leo Laporte, who's, of course, the host, the moderator, whatever, will then move on to the next topic, like, oh, dang it. Or another person will make the point that I wanted to make, and so I have to move on to something else. So it's kind of nice to have a show where I don't necessarily have to talk about technology, and I don't necessarily have to yield the microphone. So my apologies to the listeners of the first 10 or so episodes that might have gotten 2 hours of me just talking before I started appreciating that
let's bring this in at under an hour. It's a conversation between myself and Dan Benjamin, but mostly me. It winds up being me talking. But it's like, yeah, a little bit of self-control, but I understand that you need to get this. You need this 1 hour of yourself to sort of like self-therapy.
But that's what I think makes it great. I mean, and that's what makes it stand out from these other shows that you regularly appear on that we're going to talk about. You mentioned MacBreak Weekly, is that it is kind of Andy going off for an hour or so and whatever the topic may be. And you've done so many interesting things on there you've talked about. I love hearing your travel stories or the pictures with the cows, or I was a little disappointed, I have to tell you, that this past holiday season we didn't get another holiday movie narrated by you like we did year before last. So many interesting things that you've done with that show, and it almost feels like you almost have a ton of fun doing that.
Oh, absolutely. And part of it is that I can make it whatever I want to make it. I know that the most successful podcasts, commercially and also usually creatively, are ones where there is clearly a focus and there is a product on the shelf with a label that's easy for people to find and easy for people to understand. I love the Judge John Hodgman podcast because it's just so simple. Where he's just going to moderate an argument / debate between two people who have a very simple disagreement. And it will go into a million different areas, and some of the best surprises as people start to actually talk out a problem that they thought was very, very simple and thought was more funny than serious. But then they managed to find some really important threads of their relationship as they're talking about the reasons why that, God, my husband sometimes takes stuff that out of our kitchen garbage and eats it. And you don't know that it's going to go and define some really, really important things about their marriage, but it does. But it's still, the theme is that John Hodgman moderates a discussion and a disagreement between two people. I can never find a kind of hook for that, but I do enjoy that. If I do want to do a commentary track for a movie that really, really puzzles me deeply, I can do that commentary track. And when Apple has a big media event, I can talk about the news from that event. And if I've just had a great time cooking with a sous vide machine, I can talk about how great it is to use the sous vide machine to cook. It's just great to. I've always admired those people that seem to have this powerful creative engine, just this drive shaft that's always spinning, and they can connect the output of that machine to a bunch of different things. Kind of like how Steve Martin can be a brilliant comedian, but can also be a brilliant comedic actor, but also can be a great banjo player. Again, it's just that engine that keeps turning, and I've always aspired to be that kind of person. I don't know if I certainly can't say that I'm actually there, but I would like to at least have the ability to pursue every single way of expressing my points of view as possible, in the hopes that I will make them as interesting as I can to as great a variety of people as I can.
Well, I love it. It's one of my must listens to. It always jumps to the top of the list when a new one comes out, because I always know I'm going to, and oftentimes, I'll be honest with you, some of the topics aren't necessarily up my alley, but I end up listening to it because I want to hear you and Dan kind of go back and forth on something. I mean, when Dan gets to talking about the bugs in Texas, but just hearing him talk about them make me want to listen to this conversation back and forth, because there's usually a weather check-in with you guys at the beginning. So
yeah, again, you got to trick people into hearing about things that maybe they're not interested in, because often you're not talking about things that are objectively interesting. But if you naturally just find a way that it is universally appreciated, then you're certainly on the right track.
Well, on the complete other end of the spectrum, I imagine that the Ihnatko Almanac has not necessarily called upon you in the same way that MacBreak Weekly frequently does, whether this be video, whether this be calling in remotely and Skyping from the streets of New York, or live reports from press conferences, or whatever the case may be. You've done all kinds of things with MacBreak Weekly, and you've been there a long, long time. Can you tell folks about kind of how you joining that show started?
Yeah, it's. I think I joined the show. I think it had been going for a couple of years before I joined the panel. It used to be. It was Leo Laporte and Alex Lindsay were always two of the people involved. third was Scott Bourne, the really great wildlife photographer, and then I think Merlin Mann was also the fourth. It was, I think the first time I was there as a guest was I was speaking on what was called a Mac Geeks cruise. There was a company that would book cruises and have a sort of a like Mac convention or conference on the ship during the cruise. The idea being that when the ship is in port, obviously you're parasailing and you're climbing a Mayan pyramid and that sort of stuff. But when the ship is at sea, if you don't want to be, sticking your head in the chocolate fountain or swimming or something like that, we would have sessions in which you would learn about how to fix your Mac and how the Finder works and that all that sort of topics. And Leo was a speaker, I was a speaker, a whole bunch of other people were, and he needed to record an episode of MacBreak, so he composed a panel of himself and 2 or 3 other Mac people who were on the ship, and it was a lot of fun. And then a couple months later, Scott or somebody was not going to be available for a week, so I came in as a guest again, and that happened a few more times. And then when Scott didn't have enough time in the week to keep doing it, I was offered the regular seat, and I happily accepted it. And it's a lot of fun.
And I want to ask you, because for folks who aren't familiar with MacBreak Weekly, and I imagine most of the people listening to this probably are, but I mentioned it's a video, and I know you talked recently, I think actually on the Ihnatko Almanac, about lighting upgrading that you've had to do, and this is the only show that is regularly done in video. Is that correct?
It's the only show that I do that is usually done as a video podcast, and that's part of the evolution of what Leo has done with This Week in Tech Network. And when I got started, I was doing it with a cheap USB microphone in a corner, just in front of my regular iMac in the corner of my office. I didn't need to shave. I could be wearing the same T-shirt that I slept in, and then things get a little bit. You get more fascinated by the process, and you get sort of interested in improving your product, so to speak. And so as you go by, it's like first I wound up getting a better microphone, and because you have to eat your own dog food, and sometimes you listen to your own recordings and think, oh geez, it's I'm coming through clear, but it's not a really nice. It's not something I'd like to really technically listen to for more than a half an hour or so. But you can solve that pretty inexpensively. You get a really great microphone for $300. So I got a nice microphone. Then I got a Heil a tension arm, a desk mount for it, so I can actually have it floating wherever I want it to go. So now I don't have to keep moving it around the desk, so I have room for my laptop. Okay, that's nice. And then they started doing it on video, and so now I have to shave. Now I have to make sure I have a clean shirt. And then you do your own dog fooding, and then you realize that, okay, the iSight camera built into my iMac is just not very flattering. So, okay, I'll get like a Logitech, like a little external camera. And then you realize that most of the light is coming like off of the screen, so you look like, Dracula uplit in blue lighting. So you start to think, okay, IKEA has this lamp that's sort of a Chinese lantern, and so maybe I'll get that as my regular desk lamp, and then I'll just move it close and use that as my lighting. And then you just keep upgrading and upgrading, trying to find these nice components, because you really are interested in. I can't necessarily control whether I'm sounding like a professional, responsible, intelligent adult given the words that I choose to say, but I can at least be lit like an adult, like a responsible adult, and I can sound like a responsible adult through the microphone. And so the last upgrades I did was the last big revolution was when it became, okay, we're going to be really serious now. And moved I have a dedicated desk that is just for nothing but podcasting, so that this desk remains pretty much clean and clear, whereas my work desk can have all kinds of stuff on it. And so I moved that to a corner of the office where I can control the lighting. I have blackout curtains on those windows, so that when I'm recording, no light is coming in from the outside, because if I'm recording for MacBreak will often go for 2 hours, and so it's great to like if you want to take a self-portrait, a big window of natural lighting is perfect, exactly what you want. But video, over the course of an hour, the light's going to keep changing on you. And so it's going to look great at the start, but then it's just terrible an hour later. So black out all the curtains. Then I got a big halogen light and this huge, like, white softbox about 20, maybe 30 inches on a side. So throws off so much heat. There's actually a cooling fan in the back of it. Got an overhead light that gives me light from the top, so that I got some light on my shoulders to give myself a little bit of definition from the background, and then start changing the background, which used to be just a table behind me that would have stuff on it. And then I started getting sick of the, big pile of crap behind you sort of motif that I see in a lot of podcasts. So I just had a backdrop printed and then bought a hanging system for it. So the latest thing I did was, it's feels kind of wasteful to have this big, like, 8 jillion watt light on for 2 hours. So I bought just a few weeks ago this really nice, like, 1200 LED lighting panel. That's honest, and I put that on the stand. That's working great. Now I'm going to buy a second one so I can balance the light from the left and the right a little bit. But it really is. If all it does is make me feel a little bit more confident that at least I look as I'm stuck with the face and the body that I've got, but if it's, I can at least control, the lighting is good, the lighting is warm, the camera is nice and sharp and focused. So at least I look like I know how to set up a camera and light a studio. And if that gives me a few extra points of self-confidence, then that I'll take all the advantages I can give. And also, I'm a nerd, so I just enjoy it. Hey, look, I'm like, can't believe it. This panel is just like almost like only like 1.5 inches, 2 inches thick, but it all like throws up as much light as that huge halogen thing, and so much less light. And but I can actually put a camera battery in it and actually take it outside. Oh, this would be great. So yeah, it's any excuse to like buy more gadgets and do more research and twiddle with settings until I get something better. I'll take that one too.
It's almost like you become an amateur set designer or director for your own little space for the MacBreak.
It is. I mean, and I occasionally do videos too, and that's part of the fun as well. Like, can I make this look really, really good? Or can I compare this to YouTube videos I've seen that I didn't like at all, and figure out why I don't like, not that they're doing something correctly or incorrectly, but why did I as a viewer like something or not like something, and then use that to inform what I'm doing, and how can I communicate more clearly through video? Should I have this extra, should I go back and add this little insert shot because I'm talking about something but not showing it? And in the process, you are firing parts of your brain you've never fired before, and you're learning a new skill that you've never tried before. And it really does allow you to, when you get back to, like we were saying before, do the thing that you're supposed to be able to do well. It's actually your brain has been pushed and prodded in so many different directions that it actually does energize you for the thing that you're supposed to be doing every day anyway.
Let's talk about video and YouTube a little bit, because you have an interesting relationship with YouTube, if you will. You've gone in these kind of phases where there's none, and then you did a period of time, a year and a half, 2 years ago, where it was every day for 10 days or 30 days. I'm trying to recall. What is your thought on that? Is that something you want to try to do more of? Is it not something you're a big fan of?
Well, last year I did a experiment where I committed myself to doing 12 episodes.
12, that's what it was.
Yeah. And with the goal of doing them once a week, but just 12 episodes. Because I realized that I wasn't doing video chiefly because I hate doing video. And I needed to figure out whether it's because I legitimately don't like it or just because it's simply too hard. Because I have to remember that there was a time when recording a podcast was way too hard. I recorded my first episode of my first podcast when I was just testing out the then brand new podcasting recording features of GarageBand. And I just remember holding this mini disc recorder in my hand and pacing back and forth across my office carpet just over and over again talking for about 3.5 minutes, and then being stuck for what to say next, and then an outburst of mild expletives, and starting over again because I lost my train of thought, or I was going someplace that really didn't go anywhere. And now, again, I can't claim to be talented at what I'm doing right now, but at least I can come up with a thought and follow it through to the end and enunciate it clearly without doing a whole lot of ums and forget I said that. Let's go back a little bit. The idea being that I hopefully don't have to go back and edit what I record as much as I had to the first time. And so it was the same thing with video. I don't like it. It's just I had to get when we switched to video on MacBreak, I had to be okay with the idea that, okay, I'm going to be showing myself on video from now on. Believe me, I don't have any sort of a self-hatred about my looks. It's just that you don't like the sound of your own voice because you don't hear it that often. And when you look at yourself on video, you are very aware of, oh, geez, I had that. I should have covered up that zit. Or, oh, man, I can't get my hair to do I can't get my hair all pointed in the same direction. I wish I could get my hair pointed in the same direction. And there's a degree to which you can fix all that sort of stuff. But there's also a degree to which you have to accept that this is your voice and you're going to have to learn to love it because you have a lovely voice. I'm not saying that to myself. I'm saying to everybody, you have a very good voice. And whatever you don't like about it is probably mostly in your head. Whatever is not in your head is easy to fix, even if it's something as simple as trying to reprogram yourself to every single time you're stuck for what to say next, wait and pause for 2 seconds and collect your thoughts and sound thoughtful rather than just continuing to make noises with your mouth. Same thing with the video. It's like I can make sure that I shave. I can make sure that I often will have an actual couple of clean shirts hanging next to the studio so that no matter what I woke up in or however badly my day is going, I will, when it's time for me to be seen by more than 3 people, I can take a clean shirt off of a hanger and be ready to go in about 5 or 10 minutes. But you have to get over that. You just have to simply forge ahead. So I decided if I didn't give myself a number that I'm going to give myself 12 of these things to do, I won't learn about this and I won't figure out what it is I like and don't like about it. And it was very educational. The first one, I thought that, well, I'm going to have to come up with a really tight outline and a really clearly stated topic. And so I did, okay, here's like the situation. Here's if you're shopping for a camera, here are the different kinds that are out there and what I think about what's appropriate for each person. And it wound up being 43 minutes, which is way too long given the amount of content that I was actually delivering. And by the time I was on show 10 or 12, it was a lot easier. And when I was editing things, I felt as though, I really should have, now that I'm looking at this a day later, I really wish I'd said this. So I'd have like a little caption saying, and also you could also, here's another thing that I would like to bring up at this point. And so by the time I'd done at least 10 of them, I was able to accept that it's possible to do useful and interesting things in just 3 or 4 minutes. And it's better to aim for a 4-minute or a 5-minute thing, record it as is, watch it, and then record it again rather than have to go into editing and more editing and more editing. And I think that I got a lot sharper. I came to enjoy the process of editing video together. I do still like that quite a bit. And the main motivation was that there are times when, if you find that you're confused about what you're doing for a living and what your career path has been, oftentimes it's because I think you've gotten trapped by your actual job title as opposed to what it is you're doing, what it is you like to do for a living. And so I've never had that sort of major crisis in my career as a writer, but a lot of things became a lot simpler and a lot more interesting, and a lot more opportunities seemed to present themselves when I realized that I'm not a news reporter and I'm not an investigative journalist. What I see myself as is an educator, that I have a point of view. I feel as though I've had enough experience that I can, by talking for a half hour in a podcast or writing 1,000 or 2,000 words in a column, I can let people have the benefit in a short amount of time of experiences they would have taken 5, 6, or 7 or 8 years to accumulate. And so once I sort of redefined myself as an educator, you start to think of podcasting not as a fun thing that you're doing when you're not writing, but as there are people that are not going to be particularly interested in reading stuff, but they listen to podcasts on their morning run every day. So if I podcast, I will be able to share my point of view with people who listen to podcasts. And there are a lot of people that don't listen to podcasts and don't read, but they do watch a lot of YouTube videos. They like to see things that are visual. So if I can figure out how to share my point of view with people who like to watch things on YouTube, that's another group of people that I would not have reached before. And for each one of these mediums, it's not about insisting that I'm going to do this the way that I want to do it. It's what are the rules of YouTube? You know, people who prefer to watch videos, why do they do that? Why do they prefer videos to standard television? And so if the rules are that I don't get to simply spend 45 minutes, blah, 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 and then adding lots of captions and titles, if I have to figure out if I thought I was going to talk for 45 minutes, can I take that and turn that into 8 separate topics of only a few minutes each, and then throw out 4 that aren't terribly important and just stick to the 4 that are really, really interesting and do 4 separate videos like that? I just don't want to be talking to the same group of people over and over and over again. I'm surprised and delighted that there are people that after a couple of decades now of writing about technology and being a commentator, that there are people who like what I do and will come to hear what I have to say. But I feel as though if I'm not trying to reach people that I haven't reached yet, I'm not doing those people any favors whatsoever. I'm not helping them out. And I'd like to help out as many people as I can.
And helping people out is sort of an undertone to another thing I wanted to mention to you. It appears to me that you, more than many others, and I know others do this, but it always has seemed to point an emphasis to you, and MacBreak Weekly is a perfect example, but in other conversations I've heard you have with folks, that you bring an emphasis to cost of a lot of this technology that most of the time is not emphasized by and large. And I, for one, as one on a budget, and many of my friends or family are, appreciate that because it's often not looked through that lens. Can you talk a little bit about that? Has that been like a concerted effort on your part to make sure you're reaching that, the vastest of audiences possible? Because there may be a lot of people listening or reading or watching that might not be able to afford that brand new whatever.
Yes, absolutely. I think that's super, super important because technology can't help anybody if they're just regarding it academically. It's not Apple makes some beautiful, beautiful things, but they're beautiful things that a lot of people get to play with for about 20 minutes at an Apple store, but they certainly can't afford it. And it sort of sticks in my craw when I see a lot of real fanboy Apple sites complaining about how Dell or HP are making computers that are made out of plastic. Oh my God! Look how underpowered this processor is. Oh my God! This has like so many USB ports. Look how many holes they put into this sort of thing. And I would really, really love if everybody could afford a $2,000 MacBook Pro. That would be great. That would be awesome. That means that they would have more money to spend clothing their kids and feeding their kids, but maybe they're lucky to have $500 to spend on a notebook. And those people should have the best notebook they can possibly have. This is why I have a great amount of admiration for a lot of different companies, not just Apple. The Chromebook, I think, is from Google and Samsung and other PC-style manufacturers, is a fantastic device. You have, for $200, $250, something that it can serve 80% of the functions of a $2,000 MacBook Pro. And for people who need access to technology, the ability that they have their own device, they have access to a word processor and access to the web and mail and online banking and job and applications for jobs and for grants and for scholarships and for funds. That's super, super important. It's the difficulty, especially if you're speaking to the Apple community, is to trick yourself into lavishing praise on whatever company can spend the most money creating the most expensive, most elegant thing. And the iPad is wonderful. It's a remarkable piece of engineering. The iPhones are also wonderful. They're terrific. But you can't ignore the fact that one of the reasons why, for instance, public libraries are so important is because that's the only access a lot of people have to the web. That it doesn't matter. They can't even afford the $250 laptop. They're coming into the library to use their public internet terminals, not to look at upskirt photos of people celebrities getting out of limousines on TMZ. It's because they need to find out what's going on with their VA benefits. And they need to apply and look for jobs. They need to apply and look for housing, and they don't. And all that stuff is now being done through computers, but they don't have a computer. And even if they had one, they maybe would not be able to afford to have internet service in their homes, which is terrible because now no computer has dial-up modems anymore. Everyone assumes that you are going to have broadband service to your house at a very expensive monthly rate, and you're going to have hardware that can broadcast Wi-Fi throughout your home. As bad as and nasty as dial-up service was, all you needed was a phone jack, and phone service is usually something that people are definitely going to have one way or another. So I just don't like us to lock ourselves in this big ivory tower where we're just doing nothing but lavishing praise on how this engineer managed to shave another millimeter off the thickness of this cabinet, and how yes, this PC, this desktop Mac costs $1,200 more than a similarly equipped Windows machine. But what you don't appreciate is that they've never made a desktop PC quite like this before, where they did away with the internal fan completely. It's all through convection that this is cooled. And again, that's nice, lovely video, beautiful object in the twirling at a slow, lazy Susan revolutions inside a glass case inside Apple, but people don't care about the fan. They care about, can they actually afford this? Can they have this? And brilliant engineering is being done to make a beautiful phone that only costs $189. I would say that the Moto G second generation, I think second, might be third generation, that Motorola released last year is every way as impressive an engineering achievement as the iPhone 6P was last year. I'm sorry. 6S was last year. Everybody's now on the kick of, we will use last year's model number, but we'll put a different letter at the end of it. And so I can't figure out whether it's going to be an X, whether it's a P, whether it's an N, whether it's an S. Sometimes that's the problem with like covering the entire industry and not just Apple. But you know what I'm talking about. Motorola made this beautiful phone, the Moto G, $189, and you own it. And does it have a camera that's as good as the iPhones or as the new Nexuses? No, they don't. No, it doesn't. But it's a good camera, and the screen isn't as beautiful as the new Nexus LED display, but it's a good display. You can play games on it. You can take pictures and post them to Facebook. You can see your friends and your family members' Instagram on it. And I just want to make sure that everybody has access to technology. Of course, it's not as important as clean water. It's not as important as food. It's not as important as heating. It's not as important as hope. But having access to technology is one of those things that recognizes the fellow dignity that every human being has. So I'm not terribly impressed by technology that puts a lot of money into being beautiful or having this sort of aesthetic about it when, God, what are you doing for people who are not in the top 20% income of everybody in the nation? What are you doing for those people? Because if you're leaving those people behind, your work is not even half finished.
On a related note, Andy, famously, not that long ago, through your series of Tech Hive articles, you made the transition from famously iPhone user to Android user. Infamously. And do you feel that part of that reason, now, of course, you've got the control, and I know you've talked a lot about the visual aspects of the OS and so on and so forth, but how much is this, availability and openness to all kind of, do you feel that maybe that had a lot to do with your decision of kind of focusing on all of technology and not necessarily being platform specific?
Well, I'd always said, I loved and still do love the iPhone. And there are a lot of times where I was accused of being an Apple fanboy. And I would respond with the absolute truth. I would say that I use Macs, I use an iPhone because it is the best solution for what I need a phone and a computer to be. And if any other device ever came along that was better, I would switch in a heartbeat. I wouldn't even think twice about it. This has nothing to do with loving the logo. This logo cannot love me back. What I need to love is what this device or what this tool or what this service can do to enhance my life. And for years, it really was the iPhone that did that for me. I'm in the unusually gifted position where I own my iPhone, but nonetheless, phone companies are going to send me 30-day loaners pretty much nonstop. So I get to try everything that's out there. And a funny thing happened a couple of years into the life of the iPhone, where I started to get Android phones that weren't amusing. They weren't like little footnotes, but there would be like one feature or two that when I put the phone back in the box and sent it back and switched back to my iPhone, like, boy, I really wished I had that feature on the iPhone. Oh, well. And then a couple of years ago, it finally reached a head where I realized that I was seriously missing Android, that I was getting so much done so much faster on an Android phone than I was on the iPhone, that I realized that the only reason why I wasn't switching to Android was because I was self-identifying so strongly as an iPhone user. And you don't want to, just like sometimes you don't want to move out of San Francisco because you identify yourself as someone who lives in San Francisco, no matter how good the job opportunity is in Portland, no matter how much more money you can make and how much more money further your money will go living in Portland. It's so hard to not say that I'm someone from Portland and I'm someone from San Francisco. And so that was the sort of thing that I was butting my own head against. I realized that's stupid. Just go and buy a new Android phone and just don't look back. But it really is a lot of it is the amount of control that you have over the device, that if you don't like the application launcher, that's fine. Just get another application launcher. They allow you to switch out application launchers. The keyboard was a lot better. There was a variety of hardware, so it wasn't just this, we're going to come out with exactly 2 models. If you don't like either one of them, tough, because these are the only 2 iPhones there are out there. And the ability to simply look out and say, well, maybe I do want to have a phone with great speakers on it, or maybe I do want to have a phone with this ridiculous 5-inch diagonal screen. Holy cow, that's a stupid size for a phone to be 5 inches. Yeah, you just love. You could really just write out on paper what features do I want a phone to have, and somewhere out there would be an Android phone that meets all this criteria. And I had to. I spent for the spring. I did switch my SIM out of my Nexus 5 phone, which I've been carrying for a year and a half and really liking, into an iPhone that I own, because I was testing out the Apple Watch. And I didn't feel as though I could really put Apple Watch through its paces without pairing it directly to an iPhone and using it for real. So I decided I was going to do that for a month, and then I decided I would stick with it for the entire summer. Because even after the Apple Watch testing was over, I felt that, I've been a regular iPhone user all along, but I haven't been a daily iPhone user for a year and a half, 2 years. Maybe I should make sure that I reorient myself. And I was very, very tempted by it. But then when I saw what was being done with Android 6, Android M, with Material Design, which is what they call their design language, their design philosophy. Oh my goodness! It just for me. This is a subjective opinion, not an objective one. It just smokes iOS in every way on a phone. It's beautiful. It's purposeful. It has a point of view. It is direct. It is almost a work of art. A well done Material Design app. Whereas I never liked iOS 7, 8, 9, but the revamp they did. I thought that it was. Way too. I thought it was way too tipped in the favor of beautiful art principles, and not enough towards the functional, dynamic nature between a person using a phone and the software that's running on a phone. I never ever liked it. I think it works better on an iPad than it does on a phone, but I never found myself stopping to simply appreciate the beauty and the flow of an app like I have with Material Design apps. Whereas I have stopped to wonder, okay, what do I what do I tap in order to create a new tweet? Is that a button, or is that a label, or is that just a piece of text? It's like it always, to me, iOS always whispers when sometimes it really needs to speak clearly and strongly. And those are the things I miss. It really does come down to, I just like the way that Android works. I mean, when I switched, I formally switched back when I got my Nexus 5X, which they just released it in September, October. I just bought mine in November, and I've sort of been waffling between switching back or not, because I love the cameras in iOS. And I love the camera apps in iOS. But when the first time that I got it set up, and I have widgets on the desktop screen, so that the most important apps, I don't even have to launch apps. I just simply flick between screens, and I see my inbox, and I see my calendar for today, and I see my to-dos for today, and I see at mentions of me on Twitter, because that's how I follow up when I post something, and to see how people are talking about it. And I realized that I had just turned this, in the space of 20 minutes, I turned this phone into a machine that was not for 20 million new users every quarter as it is on iOS. This is a machine that's designed specifically and solely for me and my needs. And I wondered why I waited so long to go back. I just really love Android.
When you made this switch, I know that the feedback, especially from the ardent fanboys, had to be absolutely insufferable at some point. I've got a lot of podcasters I know who listen to this show, Andy, and you have probably dealt with insane feedback from the public through your writing or podcasts, and I know specifically this switch. If you had a bit of advice to give to any of these podcasters listening that maybe are getting their first negative feedback or their first heinous comment online from something they've put out there, what would you tell those folks?
All I would say is that what you said, you probably said it for a reason, and those reasons are still good reasons. There's just so many elements to this question. One of them is, this is why personally I work so hard before I state an opinion, because I mostly jokingly refer to it as, I need to earn my arrogance on this opinion. I need to, by the time I publish it, I feel as though I've looked at it from every possible angle, and I have attacked it myself with every question and every complaint that I can think of, and figured out how, did I not think of that? Oh, that's right. So I need to change my thinking on this. Or, okay, if it's, the complaint is wrong, but I could see how someone could misinterpret that from what I've written. So I'll explain that a little better, or I'll be a little bit less confusing about that. So by the time someone complains about it, I will certainly read what they have to say, because oftentimes you are wrong and you need another external brain to point something out to you. But I'm able to simply say, no, I did consider that. Yes, I did do the work. Yes, I did do the research. And so, but I'm glad you got that off your chest, but it doesn't change what I said. I'm sorry that a contrary opinion hurt and offended you, but it's really not my problem. It's your problem. The other dynamic of this is that sometimes you think that they're attacking you and they're trying to belittle what you've done. Oftentimes they're not doing any of those things. They're just simply expressing an opinion, and that's fine. There are times, especially on Twitter, when someone will say something that I read either correctly or incorrectly as rude and just, an insult, when indeed they just were saying something that, this is what I felt and this is how I reacted to what you said. They didn't want to fight about this. They didn't want to make me feel bad. They just simply want to say it. They said it, so great. They should be happy right now, and I don't need to respond to it. The other thing, however, is that realize that you're not working in a vacuum. It's so unsatisfying for me to be sitting here in this chair in this corner of my office just speaking to nobody and nobody hearing it. That's a waste of my time, kind of. No, not kind of. Absolutely. That's a sign of mental illness. If I'm just sitting here muttering to myself, I should go out and find some new hobbies. I love the amount of investment, the amount of skin you put in the game to say, not only do I have a point of view, not only am I going to articulate that, but I'm going to put that out in public, and I'm going to let that sort of interact with the real world around it. And there's so many things you can learn once something that makes perfect sense to you and is a perfect gem of truth, beauty, and wisdom as you let it out into the world, and other people don't see it that way. Because once again, sometimes that's the way you battle harden your own opinions. You realize that the way that you go out through life, the eyes that and the experiences that you filter everything you see with are not the same eyes and experiences that other people bring to their perception of the world. That can be very, very valuable. But the other thing is that sometimes it can tell you something, even when you're completely right, that maybe you didn't fully understand about the state of that world. You're right, I was really shocked and surprised by a lot of the reaction to that. And before I even talk about that, I do have to, I'm a white male who wrote a piece about switching operating systems, and a lot of people said some mean things about my opinions and me as a result. That is nothing compared to what a woman on Twitter says when she says that, oh, I saw this movie, I didn't like it. She gets horrifying abuse. So this is not in the same league. But nonetheless, I was very, very surprised and shocked by how intense a lot of the reaction was, because that's, again, I do try to read things I'm writing with outside eyes, and I could say, okay, well, someone might think that I'm implying that that Apple is doomed, that they've lost the plot, that the iPhone is terrible, then it's over with. So I really need to make sure that I'm very, very clear that this is the right decision for me, but I'm not saying anything that's I think that is objectively true about iPhones in general. I just think my perspective here is that if you haven't thought about Android, here's why a person like me might be attracted to it. And a lot of people absolutely didn't see that way. And most of those people were just not in their rational minds. But the effect of that wasn't for me to feel bad or feel angry. It was to make me aware of how divisive a lot of this technology can be. And it's stupid. And I wanted to have absolutely no part of that. And I realized that I was partially accountable for this environment, because I like to think that even when I'm enthusiastic about something that I like to let that enthusiasm show. And sometimes if I'm not careful about it, if I'm not diligent about it, I can basically be a cheerleader for something. And I shouldn't be a cheerleader for something. I should be an observer. I should be, like I said, I should be an educator for this sort of stuff. And when I devote 5,000 words across 3 different articles across 2 days about how awesome this new iPad is, I'm helping to promote Apple, even though that's not my intent. And I'm helping to create the fantasy that they are not a normal company, that they are doing things on a higher level than anybody else, and they don't have the same problems, they don't make the same mistakes. And I'm sort of encouraging people to not just simply appreciate how much they like their iPad, but also I'm encouraging people to think that anything that is not an iPad sucks. And that's how you wind up a couple of years later with seeing somebody say that, hey, I switched from the iPhone to Android, and them being absolutely upset about it, because you haven't just simply stated your own personal preference. You have in some way caused them to either rethink their own perception of the world or defend their perception from what can only be perceived as an attack. So I can't say that it's not like that it made me more cautious. It didn't make me scared or anything like that. But it did make me take a couple steps back and think about what do I want my role to be? And do I want to be writing things that are useful to the companies that I sometimes write about? Again, I never wrote anything positive to curry favor or to think that maybe this company will like me. Maybe they'll invite me to their next event, or maybe they'll take me out to dinner or something. But sometimes when you realize that, I'm rushing to publish something the same week that something comes out, and I'm telling myself truthfully that I'm doing it because that's when a lot of people are going to be interested, and a lot of people are going to be thinking about, gee, should I buy this or not? And I would like my opinion to be on the pile there. But it's also useful that I'm sort of feeding the hype for this sort of thing. And do I want to be feeding hype for something? So it wasn't all about that. I mean, it was a long list of things. But 2013, and I think that was the year that I published that piece, really did force me to figure out, if I've spent 20 to 25 years writing about technology, how do I want to spend the next 20 or 25 years writing about technology? How can I look back on what I've done and be proud that I've done my work very, very well and I've done something useful, which was coincidentally, another thing that was sort of triggered by losing Roger Ebert, that you just look back on, my God, he's been just doing brilliant stuff for 50 years. He's left behind a wonderful body of work that is no one's going to really equal ever. And wouldn't I like to be in my mid-70s and be able to look back and think that, yes, I've done something that's actually valuable. And what do I want to do starting today at year 25 that I will be able to look back and credibly think that 25 years from now? So it's not enough to simply say, oh, these people are just haters, let's just ignore them. Take whatever lesson you can give from anybody who's giving you any sort of a lesson, even when they don't know that they're teaching you something. It is your job to always be learning and always be assimilating, and take everything you can get from every experience you have. A day in which you don't learn something is a day wasted, because you're not going to get this opportunity again.
But, Andy, that whole thing you just described there, I think we could actually pick that up and put that over here to describe Yankees and Red Sox fans, Republicans and Democrats, and and on and on and on with these oppositional forces.
I get very upset with people that I really had to turn it into a maxim that I've used several times, which is, don't love the logo, because the logo does not love you back. Apple doesn't love you. They only want your money. And if by the way that they get your money is by creating products that you love that help you out a lot, that's great. But the whole point is to make sure that you're buying an iPhone and not something else. Again, love the things that this iPhone can do for you that no other phone can do for you. Love the opportunities it can create for you. Love the problems that it will solve for you, but do not have any allegiance whatsoever to a logo, because that logo will never love you back.
And that other logo, which you are now carrying, is the basis of, I believe, your newest show, Material, which I had Russell on a few weeks ago, and he said a lot of nice things about you, like you were the news tech journalist they were looking for. I want to hear a little bit of your side of how Material got started and what the experience has been like so far.
Well, it was a little bit different from my perspective. A friend of mine was Jason Snell, started getting in with Mike, the founder of Relay.fm, like from day one. Jason stopped being like a senior executive at IDG, the publishers of Macworld and other computer magazines, because he was feeling as though his creative itch wasn't being solved by being an executive. He really wanted to be someone who creates something every single day. God bless him. And so, he was saying things were going great at Relay FM, and I should do a show from there. And then so, yeah, that'd be great. Whatever, I don't know what I wasn't interested in moving the Ihnatko Almanac over to Relay, but I thought, geez, yeah, I can do all kinds of other shows. And then I got word that they were looking for someone they were interested in starting an Android podcast. And so then I started talking with Russell, which to my knowledge was the other person that they were thinking about starting the podcast with. It was interesting because we really hadn't met before. We might have swapped emails or something when I was writing about Pocket Cast or something, but wasn't really talking about anything. We needed a third. Yasmin's name came up. Before we even started talking about that, we were like, one of the reasons why I knew that Russell and I would get along really well was that we basically said at the same time, it just can't be another white guy. It's like there are so many white guys doing podcasts that we cannot have a white guy as the third person on this panel. And Yasmin, I was not familiar with her, but saw her stuff when her name came up, and she was and is great. It was a lot of fun because it certainly does take. Russell talked about this on the podcast. It did take a bunch of episodes for us to get our rhythm together. As the more experienced podcaster, it was when I call it a challenge, I don't mean that these other two people were causing it to be a challenge for me. It's that sometimes you have to have new experiences to point out what your own personal failings are, and to realize that something is not a problem. It's just how you're reacting to something. And boy, the next sentence could be really, really evil. Well, you have to control your temper. And no, I mean that, like, it's okay if, gosh, I really wish that we had picked up this conversation, took it in this interesting direction that we didn't go in. But it's okay if we don't go in that direction, because this isn't my podcast. It's something that the three of us are doing together. And eventually we will figure out how to solve those problems, and we will learn each other's rhythms. The only things I will take credit for was that there are times where I actually had hand signals, because we didn't really know, as I'm sure everybody listening here has figured out, if you wind me up and put me on the floor, I will just keep talking and talking and talking. Hopefully it'll be entertaining and interesting and informative, but I will keep talking until it's time to go. And so I really do, when I'm on a show, doing a show like Material, I really do have to have this mental shot clock to realize that, okay, you've been talking now for 65 seconds. You got to wrap it up, because if you've been talking, if you're one of three people and you've been talking for 2 or 3 minutes straight, that sounds like an awfully long time where you're not having a conversation. You're just monologuing, and these two are your audience, and you can't have that. And so there are times where I would cut myself short and find, if I'm on a jag where I want to say this, and then that will lead me into being able to say that, and then I'll wind it up by saying this, I'd be doing things like self-editing, saying, okay, I'll just say the first thing and then end by asking somebody else a question to make sure that they know that I'm handing off to them. I would feel the need to just give some cues that, okay, I'm done now, and I would like someone else to talk for a while, because I feel like I'm dominating the conversation. Or I can tell that Yasmin has something really great to say, and she's in the at the very, very beginning. I can't speak to her motivation, but it felt like there were times where I was just talking so much that it seemed like I was never going to stop talking. So I felt like I have to do something. We can see each other on Skype, even though it's not a video podcast. So I feel as though I need to put my hand over my own mouth to indicate that, okay, I'm not talking anymore. So please, I know you've been waiting to jump in. Please jump in right now, because I recognize this. I'm going to shut up. We also use this. We also use Slack as a back channel. So sometimes we can. Now, instead of necessarily trying to see if someone's leading into the mic because they're excited to say something, we will just actually say, oh, I'd like to follow it up by saying this. And so it's, I was and I want to be clear. I'm not saying that I was ever the floor manager of the podcast. It's just that, like I said, if you have one person on the panel who will just talk and talk and talk and talk and talk, it is really that person's responsibility to cut themselves off after talk and talk. And so that was I don't know, I can't speak to whatever awkwardness Russell and Yasmin had for the first few shows. That was mine, saying I got to make sure that I will choose one thing to say it, and then get out.
Well, I think it's really hit a stride here lately. I mean, you guys now sound like not a 30 episode podcast, but 3 or 4 times that. I really think the rapport has really started to set in. Wouldn't you agree?
I would say so. Exactly. And a lot of that is that now I've spent enough time conversing with these two people that I know where their interests are, and I have a feeling for what their interests are, and I know that they don't have. There is really nothing they can't talk about intelligently. That was never a question for me to begin with, but sometimes you need to have that experience of talking with people to know that. Here's things that are going to get them excited, or not only that, but here's times where I'm going to lean back because I'm really enjoying hearing what Yasmin is talking about, and hearing Russell talk about things from his own perspective. And that's what really makes a podcast work great, when you're just as excited to be a listener in this conversation as in a participant. And we were talking, you and I were talking earlier about Ihnatko Almanac, where it's pretty much just me monologuing with Dan, oftentimes just being Ed McMahon, just and not because he has nothing to say, but because I don't give him much of an opportunity to say things sometimes, and it's great to it's just great to hang out with two friends and have a long conversation. The show that we recorded tonight, just an hour before I sat down to talk to you, as a matter of fact, we had an outline there were lots of really good stories in Google happening this week, and we just had such a the act one. The act one is just called chat, and we'll have whatever topics in our show notes. But here's where we want to go to, and that's usually just a quick thing. We just had such a good time just talking that we're aiming for 60 minutes, and we've just spent a half hour just idly chatting about interesting topics that had nothing to do with like the big news stories that were happening this week. So it's like, and that becomes, that's fine. Then we'll just like not get to these other two topics, and maybe we'll do that next week. We really have found a groove. I really look forward to it each and every week. And I end each recording session with a big smile on my face. So I'm very grateful to both Russell and Yasmin for that smile I have after the end of an hour or an hour and a half.
And speaking of talking and on panels, I did want to make mention as well. You brought up Jason Snell. He's a former guest here, and he was excellent to talk to. You've also made a number of appearances on the Incomparable, and just wanted your perspective on what your experience has been like being a part of that show, which is pretty much like an all-star cast of all the great writers and bloggers and podcasters in technology.
That's great fun too. I don't know if I could really support myself doing a pop culture podcast, but it's the sort of thing where, we're on Slack and we're on this mailing list together, and there'll be a topic thrown out there, and it's like, oh my God, I will cancel my plans for Saturday if I get to talk about Hamilton for 2 hours with any group of people. God, I really screwed myself over the weekend because there are two shows like that that were on the list, and the only time when everyone that were interested in doing this panel could get together was like Saturday at 3:00 and Sunday at noon. And that means that I can't leave the house. I can't go out and make plans really for Saturday, and I can't really go out all day and make plans for Sunday. So I was kind of, I'm not going to say that I was sequestered inside the house all weekend, but it was like, no, I couldn't go out and see a movie with friends because I had to like be there at 3:30. And I had, my lunch plans had to become dinner plans for Sunday. But again, it's like with material. It's like, I just so enjoy, with Russell and Yasmin, not only just the joy of having a great conversation with two intelligent people that I respect deeply, but also, and not just the selfish act of I get to share my point of view, but also I just want to hear what Russell has to say about the new Chromebook Pixel C. I'm sorry, I don't think they're calling it the Chromebook. I really want to hear why Yasmin was so excited about talking about the new version of 1Password, because at this point I know her enough that whatever gets her excited is going to be really interesting, and she's gonna share that enthusiasm, but not just in a burbly sort of fangirlish way, but she'll have something really smart to say about why this is so significant, and she'll have really good and sharp criticisms. And this will sound strange, but I'm buying a new office chair, a nice one, because this old one is like 15 years old and really worn out. But when I'm in the showroom at Steelcase, like testing these things out, one of the things I really have to test out is how comfortable is it to sit in leaning back, when just lean back and like stay there, because some of the parts I really enjoy most about recording material is when, again, I'm leaning back not only to visually convey to Russell and Yasmin that I've been talking to, I'm self-censoring myself because I've been talking too much. I'm not even near the microphone, but also because I'm just leaning back and enjoying listening to this podcast live, And what a joy that is, to be in a regular podcast with people that you just enjoy hanging out with, that you feel like you're getting smarter talking to them. I have that same experience with MacBreak. We do MacBreak in the afternoon, and then we do material later that night. And it's just hanging out with friends of mine for 5 or 6 hours. And when I get to do an Incomparable podcast, it's the exact same thing. It's like people that are really, really smart and have experiences and tastes that are different from mine, but it's never in the sense of those people who hated my Android piece. It's not, if we did an album draft on Sunday on the Incomparable, where we're each choosing a favorite album, and of course, once somebody chooses Abbey Road, no one else can choose it because it's a draft. And they're mentioning albums that I've never heard of, or I'd heard of but never really been interested in. But because I respect these people so much, and because they're sharing their enthusiasm so effectively, I'm just quickly writing things down and adding things to my Spotify list, and maybe even buying some albums, because I'm so entertained listening to them that I just feel like I'm very, very lucky to be part of this panel. So, like I said, I just feel so lucky to have found that group in MacBreak, and to have found that group in Material, so that, I mean, it's not work doing these shows. It's just pleasure. And I know that if there's any pleasure happening in any small group, I'm not going to be the one who's providing my share of it. It's a lot of other people providing theirs plus and then some to make up the 100% quota of pleasure that's being created by the group.
I'll tell you what, Andy, I can completely appreciate the concept of the pleasure of the participation in some of these podcasts. I get it myself from talking to a lot of the wonderful guests that I've been fortunate to have been joined by, and that is another one has been added with this episode. Andy, I can't thank you enough for taking the time to join me.
Oh, thanks again for having me. It's like the best thing I can say about our conversation tonight and how much I enjoyed listening to your previous podcast was this marks this is the start of hour 6 of me being behind a microphone today, and I feel like I had a good time. I don't regret having scheduled this for Tuesday night at the end of Podcast Mania Day.
I could not appreciate it anymore, and I, like I said, I've told Mike, I emailed Mike not long ago, because he was actually the very first person from Relay I had on this show. I told him I was going to be working through the Relay roster, and I've talked with Mike and Steven, Russell, yourself, Jason, and so I'm working on it. So
Yasmin's got to be next.
Yep. I'm going down the list. Yasmin will be up next as well. Before I let you go, Andy, I did want to just ask one quick question, because somebody is wondering this, and if I don't bring this up, somebody's going to be disappointed. Can you tell us what the story is with the squirrels?
Yeah, I do have a lot of pictures of squirrels in my Flickr stream and on Twitter. It started out as a little bit of a joke. I have a standard. I'm often testing out cameras these days. Most of them are cameras that are inside phones, but also standalone cameras sometimes. And so I have I wouldn't call it a technical test suite, but to figure out how good a camera this is, and also how easy it is to use and how nimble it is, I will take a walk through Boston, and I'll just take pictures and have fun. But also, there's sort of a collection of standard photos that I'm going to take. A lot of them take place in the Boston Public Library, because if I know how, at this point, I've been taking these same photos for years and years and years, and so at this point, I know what a camera should be able to do in a lot of these situations. Like if I'm in the middle of this, there's this room called the Abbey Room at the Boston Public Library. It's called the Abbey Room because this illustrator of the late 19th century by the name of Abbey, created this mural sequence of the quest for the Holy Grail. Just gorgeous artwork, beautiful colors and metals and everything, but it's not really well lit. And so I know that if I take a picture of this section of the mural and there's a bright window next to it, a decent camera should be able to do this. A bad camera, it'll be full of grain, and the window next to it will just like explode with light and just contaminate the whole image. So that's why I take these regular images. And one year, I think it was the iPhone 4 or the iPhone 4S. It was the first iPhone where the quality of the camera was so good that you can finally start to rate it alongside a standalone camera, as opposed to, hey, what do you expect? It's just a phone camera. And during my briefing after the rollout, they handed me this big, like 8.5 by 11, 8 by 10, it might have even been longer than that, print of this super close-up picture of a squirrel. And of course, my question, like, to the Apple executives was, okay, now was this squirrel alive when you took that picture? Because you're awfully close there. And they also released this as one of the demo images of how good this camera is. And so after I was taking a couple of my pictures are also in Boston's Public Garden, And so I was having a good time with the camera. So, okay, you know what? I'll see if I can get a squirrel picture so I can duplicate, see how accurate their results were. And over the course, and but over the course of that and a couple other cameras, I realized that this was a photo that was missing from my test suite, because I really do try to test out that camera in all kinds of conditions that people are actually going to use it in. But I don't have any kids, so I don't have the ability to try to take pictures of little kids, because it's 2016 and you will get arrested.
That might be weird.
You're in the park taking pictures of, yeah, exactly. I don't want or need that kind of trouble. And then but I came to realize that I have the perfect analog for a 4-year-old child in a squirrel. Like they're small. They will not. No matter how often and how loudly or angrily you say, "Sit down, shut up, stop moving, and pose for the camera," they will still move in quick darting, unpredictable, psycho sort of directions. And so, if you can take good pictures of a squirrel, then this will probably be a good camera to take pictures of little kids with. And I'm not joking here. It really is useful. For instance, there are things you only learn when you take lots and lots of photos and lots of different subjects. One of the things I learned, for instance, is that of course, every phone camera has to solve the problem of having this tiny, tiny little sensor that does not want to be cranked up to high ISOs, because when you make it more sensitive, more and more noise just starts to destroy the image. And different cameras have different solutions to that problem. The iPhone's favorite solution is to extend the shutter speed. This is why all of the greatest, tack sharp pictures I have of squirrels taken with camera phones are all Android devices. The iPhone pictures, they're lovely in their own way, but if that animal moves just a little bit and it's an overcast day, you're done. Because the shutter speed is slow enough that any movement in the animal or in your hands is going to not create a blurry image necessarily, but not really a sharp image where you can see the highlights on the creature's whiskers. So it started off as a joke, but then it became actually something that's very, very useful. So as a result, it's just an indication that sometimes the best discoveries happen when you think you're doing something stupid and funny.
I've heard you make the kid parallel before. I had not heard the origin coming from a blown up Apple picture, so I did not know that. So thank you for filling us all in on that. The mystery has been solved at this point.
I live to serve. I'm here to solve mysteries.
Folks, links to all of Andy's shows and work will be included in the show notes. As always, it will be over there. Please go and check out all of the great shows that we've been talking about here tonight. Andy, if you want, tell people where they can find you on social media.
The price of admission is to spell my last name correctly. It's IH, N as in Nancy, AT as in Tom, KO. I'm Ihnatko on Twitter. I'm also, my website, my blog is ihnatko.com, where you can find stuff that I couldn't trick people into paying me to write, so I just wrote them for fun and posted them. But my Twitter feed has links to things I've published, things I'm just on my mind, even the occasional podcast and stuff.
Perfect. Andy, thank you so much. This has been a real thrill for me, and I really appreciate your time.
Again, thanks for having me on. This is really fun.
Folks, that'll do it for this week on the Podcast Digest. Episode 78's in the books. Until next week, my name's Dan Lizette, and I'll talk to you then.
Thank you for listening to the Podcast Digest. You can follow the show on Twitter @PodDigest. Like the show on Facebook at facebook.com/The Podcast Digest. Email the show feedback at thepodcastdigest@gmail.com. And you can find all the previous episodes and exclusive blog entries at the show's website, thepodcastdigest.info.